Hello, my fellow classmates. Today I want to talk to you about the subject of afterlife. I became seriously interested in this subject after my wife Chris passed away after 55 years of marriage in 2019. I wanted to know what the future might hold for her, as well as for my many close friends, relatives, and Dartmouth classmates who have also passed away in recent years. Is there convincing evidence of an afterlife? Might we see all of our classmates again in a higher realm? Well, after doing many months of research, including reading 11 related books on this subject, 6 of which were written by doctors, I am convinced that there is in fact a higher realm that awaits us after our hearts and brains cease to function. I discovered that we have been given major clues of the existence of an afterlife by people from all over the world, including scientists and physicians, who have had what are called near-death experiences, as well as people who have received what are called after-death communications from deceased relatives or close friends. Studies have shown that 10 to 20% of patients close to death have had near-death experiences, and that 20% of the U.S. population have received some form of communication from deceased relatives. Later in this presentation, I will cite an example of my late wife's communication with me regarding the future care of our mentally challenged daughter, Renee. But first, let's look at NDEs. These occur most often during a cardiac arrest in a hospital operating room, or after a severe auto accident or a near drowning, or sometimes in dire situations when someone truly fears that death is imminent. Some of the common elements of a near-death experience include an out-of-body experience where one is looking down on one's body from above, or one might travel through a dark tunnel to a brilliant light or being of light that sometimes speaks, or there may be encountering deceased relatives or close deceased friends, or one might experience a panoramic life review. And then, of course, there is always a return to the body, either voluntary or involuntary. Trying to describe near-death experiences in writing by me or in a presentation like this by me is very, very difficult. To really appreciate them, one has to watch and listen to near-death experiencers tell their stories on a channel such as YouTube. I have watched dozens of these presentations, including experiences of doctors and scientists who themselves have had a near-death experience. Many of the doctors have written captivating books about their near-death experiences, and others have written books about their studies of the patterns and consistencies of near-death experiences. All of these professional physicians have conducted countless interviews of near-death experiencers from all over the world, and all believe in the existence of an afterlife. A few of the bestsellers about near-death experiences, all of which I have read recently, include Dr. Raymond Moody's Life After Life, Dr. Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven, Dr. Mary Neal's To Heaven and Back, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll's Not Yet, Professor Kenneth Ring, PhD's Lessons from the Light, Dr. Bruce Grayson's After, and Dr. Jeffrey Long's Evidence of the Afterlife. Reading all these books by medical professionals was extremely helpful in convincing me of the reality of near-death experiences and the existence of an afterlife. All of the doctors who have written books about this subject are always trying their best to spread the good news about the existence of an afterlife. One example, Dr. Eben Alexander says, and I quote, "For the sake of those here on earth and those I met beyond the realm, I see it as my duty, both as a scientist and hence a seeker of truth, and as a doctor devoted to helping people, to make it known to as many people as I can that what I underwent was true and real and of stunning importance, not only to me but to all of us." And as Dr. Bruce Grayson, professor at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, says, quote, "The evidence shows that near-death experiences transform the lives not only of the people who have them and their loved ones, but also the researchers who studied them. Me, Dick Knoll, I now consider myself kind of a humble part-time near-death experience researcher." Now I realize that the majority of people are quite skeptical of the more mystical elements of a near-death experience, so let me give you one example of part of a near-death experience that even the most ardent skeptic will appreciate. Kimberly Clark Sharp, a near-death researcher from Seattle, Washington, interviewed a woman named Maria who had been rushed to the hospital after a severe heart attack. As part of her near-death experience, Maria told Kimberly Sharp that she had an out-of-body experience and actually floated upward outside the hospital building, where she saw, among other things, a man's tennis shoe on the third-story ledge of the hospital building. She described it quite specifically as left-footed, dark blue color, a wear mark over the little toe, and a shoelace tucked under the heel. Now, researcher Sharp's scientific mind led her to search the third-floor window ledges, and she eventually found that tennis shoe exactly as Maria had described it. There are many other stories like this one. I do think of all the books I have read about near-death experiences, the one that expresses the most comprehensive case for the reality of near-death experiences and the existence of an afterlife is Dr. Jeffrey Long's book entitled, appropriately, Evidence of the Afterlife. Dr. Long's exhaustive study of 1,300 cases of near-death experiences led him to what he calls 9 lines of evidence for the existence of an afterlife. Here are some of them. First, level of consciousness during near-death experiences is usually greater than that experienced during everyday life, even though near-death experiences generally occur when a person is unconscious or clinically dead. 2, what near-death experiencers see and hear in the out-of-body experience state during their near-death experience is generally realistic and often verified later by the near-death experiencer or others as real. Example, the Maria tennis shoe incident. 3, normal or supernormal vision occurs in near-death experiencers among those with significantly impaired vision or even legal blindness. 4, typical near-death experiencers occur under general anesthesia at a time when most doctors will tell you that conscious experience should be impossible. 5, life reviews in near-death experiences include real events that took place in the near-death experiencer's lives even if these events were forgotten. 6, when near-death experiencers encounter beings they know from their earthly life, they are virtually always deceased. And 7, the near-death experiences of children, including very young children, are strikingly similar to those of older children and adults. The most important findings of Dr. Long's study have been corroborated by scores of prior scholarly near-death experience studies over more than 30 years. Of course, in this 13-minute presentation, I do not have time to cover all these other studies. Let's move on now to after-death communications. These are communications from people who are not near death but are actually deceased. The best source of information about ADCs can be found in a book by Bill and Judy Guggenheim called Hello from Heaven. It contains 353 fascinating accounts of people who have received communication from deceased relatives or deceased friends. The most touching stories are about parents who have lost a child in an accident and then have that child appear to them to assure them that he or she is just fine in a higher realm. I myself recently exchanged emails with Bill Guggenheim about a more subtle ADC incident involving my wife, Chris, who passed away in 2019, as I said earlier, and my innocent, mentally challenged daughter, Renee, sweetheart. The incident involved 2 videos that I uploaded to YouTube. The first video was made back in 2014 of Renee, who, after 15 years as a grocery bagger at Hannaford Supermarket, was finally honored as Employee of the Month and had her picture posted right up on the front wall. The second video was one of a song I sang to my wife Chris at her 2019 funeral entitled When Tomorrow Never Comes. My brother, without my knowledge, recorded it on his cell phone and sent it to me. So I then uploaded it to YouTube so relatives who could not attend the funeral could see it. Now I have to explain that Renee has been married for over 22 years to her special ed classmate Brad, and the 2 of them have always lived together in a nearby mobile home park. My wife Chris was always very, very nervous about Renee moving out of our home, so she called Renee twice a day, every single day. Now, about 2 weeks after Chris's funeral, I looked up on YouTube the song I had sung to Chris at her funeral. And after the song finished, an amazing thing happened. Up came the video I had made of Renee 5 years ago being honored as Employee of the Month. I had forgotten about that video and had not seen it for over 5 years. I am absolutely convinced that Chris in another realm somehow had that video appear to remind me that it was now my job to make those twice-a-day calls to Renee to be sure she is okay. And I can assure you I have done that every day since. I have 2 other personal stories of incidents involving a higher power that I would be more than willing to share, one of which is related to the 2002 Super Bowl. But I don't have time in this brief presentation to discuss them, but would be happy to do so in the Q&A session if anyone is interested. There are so many heartfelt testimonies of after-death communications and near-death experiences that I would love to cover, but that would easily extend this presentation to over an hour. But I would like to tell you just one more that has really stood out for me. It is the story of 9-year-old Ernest, who was in a coma for 36 hours at a regional hospital. His parents, who had stayed right with him, were at his bedside when he woke up at 3 a.m. and described a near-death experience in which he saw a deceased uncle and aunt and his deceased grandfather. His parents just nodded, thinking it was just a dream. But then Ernest said he also saw his 19-year-old sister Teresa, who told him he had to go back. This upset his parents because Teresa was at a college over 600 miles away and they had just spoken to her 2 nights earlier. They told the doctor to give Ernest a sedative. But later that day, when the parents returned home, there was an urgent message from the college to please return a call as soon as possible. They called and learned the college had been trying to reach them and that Teresa had tragically died just after midnight in an auto accident. In summary, in these brief 13 minutes, I have only been able to give you a small tip of the evidence iceberg of the existence of the afterlife. I understand, of course, and accept that for many it will boil down not so much to the presentation of evidence, but more to each person's individual faith. And I believe, of course, that the door is always open to faith. God has given all of us the free will to embrace faith. And as near-death experiencer Mary Neal says, and I quote, "It is faith that sets us free. It allows us to fully embrace life, dissolve fear, and replace worry with hope. Faith allows us to confidently walk with God into a future filled with joy." Now, if I have sparked any interest in you, please, when you have a bit of free time, do this simple follow. Type on a search line on your computer simply Dr. Jeffrey Long YouTube, or separately Dr. Bruce Grayson YouTube, and then watch the videos you uncover. Just viewing presentations by these 2 professional medical experts, neither of which has himself had a near-death experience, will, I'm confident, bring you very close to a firm belief in a peaceful, joyful afterlife. Thank you for watching my presentation.